Welcome to Race and Point. My name is Lavette Coney.
And my name is Michelle Chalmers.
And we're happy to bring to you discussions around race and racism. And we will be bringing on guest speakers, and we'll talk about the news and how race plays out in our daily lives.
And we're really excited for Race and Point. This is our second episode. Our first episode you can find on our website at raceinpoint.com or on the Wellesley Media Access page. And we're really excited to have our first guest today, who I'd like to introduce to you. So I'm excited to introduce our guest, Laura Soul Brown. Laura is the Director of Grants Development for MassBay Community College here in Wellesley, where she pursues external funding to advance the college's strategic priorities. She sits on the Cabinet President's Council, the Student Nourishment and Care Committee, which we'll discuss today, and serves as an ex officio board member for the World of Wellesley. Soul is also a doctoral student at Pacific University in Oregon, where her research focuses on critical race theory and student activism and educational reform movements and counter-narrative voice. So welcome.
Welcome.
Well, thank you. Glad to be here. I'm just like listening to your introduction and saying, wow, am I doing all of those things?
You are, and then some.
Right,
yes.
great.
Which is why we wanted to have you on. Obviously, I have known you for probably about 6 years now, I think, right?
Well, I've been at the college for 5.5 years.
Oh, okay.
It probably feels like 6 years.
Almost, because when Eve left, yeah. So
Yeah.
I think, so Sol and I have been working together with the World of Wellesley. Mm-hmm. And so we've had a lot of opportunities to have some conversations and engagements, as we work as a nonprofit to engage the community to make Wellesley a more welcoming place. And so you have really been instrumental in a lot of the things that we've done with your insight. And so we wanted to bring you on and on Race and Point to get a little bit more of what you think and have experienced in your life experiences in navigating race and racism. And so
I would like to know how she navigated racism in Wellesley when she's doing her work with World of Wellesley. That would be interesting for me to know.
Well, I mean, it actually, World of Wellesley makes it easier, right?
Good.
That's what the whole organization is about in terms of acknowledging the diversity that is within the Wellesley community, because there's many people here, some of whom aren't thought about when you think about Wellesley. And then the whole notion of World of Wellesley making Wellesley a welcoming place, really inclusion, right? So how do we include people who don't look like your typical Wellesley person or who don't embody that, white and wealthy? So it's been really, for me, like ideal to be a part of World of Wellesley, also being led by Michelle and all of the people who are part of that, who recognize that this community is more than what people think Wellesley is, and that everyone deserves to be at the table and be heard, and our issues have meaning, right? And that we can work together on things that are problematic, and those may indeed be located in the space of racism or some ethnicity, and then some other issues as well. So I think that World of Wellesley is really important to this community. It's been doing phenomenal work of raising awareness, of bringing a wokeness, right? The wokeness to the town of Wellesley. And I hope that people in this town appreciate that, because it would be sad if the town were just one of those sleepy suburban towns that is missing the currency of what is going on locally and in society today. I mean, and we know that there's always something that is occurring locally as well as nationally around issues of race, around issues of inclusion, around immigration, and many, many other topics that don't have to be viewed as problematic if we have these conversations, if we have more of a desire to include everyone in the conversation and in the community. It's unfortunate that there is still so much polarization in people's minds and in the way that they interact with others.
So it sounds like there should be a World of Wellesley in every suburban town, something similar to, World of Woburn or World of Weston. No?
Yeah, and I mean, World of Wellesley definitely partners with some of the neighboring towns, like Needham is very active.
The Needham Diversity Initiative.
Is that what it is?
Natics United.
There it is.
Wayland has an organization. Newton is now working.
Really?
So, and this has happened as World of Wellesley gains a little bit more traction and understanding. But to your point, Sol, that understanding the importance of those conversations, the importance of thinking about the community and what the diversity of thought, the diversity of experiences can bring to a community. And I think that's one of the things that I know you and I have talked about is struggling in Wellesley for people to think, maybe not even that they think that it's important. They may think that it's important, but the priorities aren't there, right? And what does this have to do with me? Or in my limited time that I have, where am I spending my time? And so, yes, I would love to go to a World of Wellesley event. However, I have other things to do. And so how to have people live out their values is a challenge.
And tap into their humanity, right? I mean, at some point you have to be able to do that too, right?
But how do you get people to even see that connection that's what the purpose of this is? It really is to have us individually understand our humanity and not something that we're asking people to come collectively to somehow give your energy and resources to something else, but to yourself.
And I think, like what I hear you saying, Michelle, is a lot of times people espouse certain values, right? But they don't live them.
Right.
Okay. And I think that that's very common. And that's very hypocritical. And I think that's the problem. It's like, yeah, you can espouse values, but if you're not living those, being those, putting them out into the world, then they really don't amount to anything. And so you can walk around thinking, well, I have decent values, I'm a good person. But really, what have you done to show that? And it's not just about an individual. It's really about us, like in relationship and in community. And it's also about helping people who aren't as privileged as you are, right? Those people who are on the margin, who have less power, less voice, who aren't at the table, how are you bringing them to the table? How are you thinking about them, the reality that they don't have as many resources as you, but they probably have similar needs? So are you making a way for them to be able to have more opportunity? And that's, I think, really important to be thinking about, because otherwise it's benign. What you believe, you think, how you see yourself as being good, but if you're not helping, then you're part of the problem. Is that what it says?
Exactly, but I think a lot of those types of people think that, okay, I'm a good person, I don't do anything wrong, and they see it as an interpersonal activity, right? So as long as I don't call you a name or I'm not wearing a white sheet over my head, I'm good. but they don't understand the layers of oppression and racism, right? Being ideological, being institutional, and also being internalized, right? So whether you're on the side of a person who's white and who internalized their superiority, or a person of color who perceived, right? And the ones who perceive that they are inferior because they are of color. So those individuals, I believe, they think they're good because they don't know the whole picture. Mm-hmm. They don't have the scope.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think, like, you know, obviously, like, there's every day there's an issue that comes up, right, in the major media.
Race in point.
Yeah, national issues. And I think particularly disturbing is, you know, the situations that are taking place on the southern border, right? Mm-hmm. Children being separated from their families, all these people locked into these internment camps and things like that for who knows how long, mistreatments and things like that. And yet there's a lot of silence when it comes to us.
Because it doesn't affect them personally and intimately and on a day-to-day basis. And
but
I think that's so sad. It is. And if you think about even what you described, is similar to indigenous people and what they experience, and also people of African descent, when you just now said, like, being, you know, children taken away from them, and like all the impacts of that over generations. You know, so it's all across the board.
Yeah, but we're in 2019, nearly 2020, right? People think we've evolved since the enslavement of Africans in this country. It's actually 400-year anniversary in 1919. I think it was 1619 when the first Africans were imported from the continent. And we think of ourselves as being evolved from, have to bring it up, you know, World War II and all of the, you know, Jewish internment, right? Japanese internment in this country, okay? And the native children being pulled from their families. You showed a film at MassBay.
Dawnland.
Yes, was that last year?
Yeah.
And some of that activity is taking place now, even, right? So they're still unwinding that. And so we have this perspective like this is historic. Like this happened in the past and we have evolved, we're more sophisticated, we have, you know, we're more understanding, we're more inclusive, but we're not, because we're allowing the same activity to be taking place right now as I'm speaking to you, and we act like we didn't hear it, we didn't see it. Oh, so I didn't know, and if I had known, that would never have taken place. This is happening in the United States of America. This is happening in the city of Boston, where ICE is raiding, and Lawrence, and here and there. This is happening all around our country. And the activity is very similar to those moments in history that I just talked about.
Right.
But you have to understand, too, we were talking about it earlier, about most of us are in a bubble. And we're comforted with all of these, you know, external and materialistic things, and that we're comfortable, and we don't want anything to interfere with that. So
do you live in that bubble?
I don't, because I'm doing the work.
So who really lives in this bubble? What is this bubble like? Is Wellesley the bubble?
Wellesley is definitely a bubble. I mean, I think that you could go weeks without seeing person of color.
You didn't go up on the hill in MassBay.
No, you didn't go to MassBay.
You missed that. You didn't go up to Wellesley Hills.
Your groceries sent to you by courier.
Okay.
I think that you can really keep yourself from understanding the world around you. I think that a lot of people do. I think that it is difficult to understand the truth. It is difficult to understand that historically this has always happened. I think that so many people are like, I can't believe that this is happening. Like that our government is removing children from their parents when this has always happened for the past 400 years since Europeans invaded. So that is one of those things that if you don't know that history, then this is going to seem overwhelming. And then you turn off the TV. You have your social media to where you have the people that think like you, look like you, where you can keep yourself pretty isolated.
I would push back against this bubble idea. Now, I do know that these bubbles exist,
Yes.
right? Like the bubbles in my soda. But, okay, first of all, black and brown people of color,
Yeah.
don't have the luxury to live in bubbles. Like some do, you know,
Right.
well, some live in bubbles, but those bubbles get burst too, right? They're not permanent bubbles. But the majority of people of color do not get an opportunity to abide in some bubble. But the other piece of this is not a ideal state to be a bubble people.
Right.
You know, and when we talk about this notion of being in a bubble and not seeing and not feeling what is going on in society or in your community, it's funny, I think about corporate America. Because sometimes when you go into these corporations, it feels like you enter a bubble, right? Because it's all behind this glass and steel. You can't get in without one of those passes, right? And I don't care if you're carrying ID or not. They're like, are you on this list, right? Oh no, you're not on the list. You cannot like get beyond this piece of glass, right? And then everybody is in this very pristine environment, right? You could see through the glass sometimes, right? And they're all in there, and they're kind of like orderly, and they have catering so they don't have to leave. Right?
Isn't that by design?
It is by design. And so this is, I'm saying this because I really think this is how artificially this bubble mentality is created. And that the people who exist in that kind of context, in that world, oftentimes are the people who work in those environments, right? And so, and you can even bring it into the field that I work in, higher education. Now, I work at a community college. That's not a bubble part of higher ed, but I went to Tufts University and those kinds of elite private universities, colleges, those are kind of bubbled. I remember when I was an undergraduate and I was, you know, in Tufts, there's this feeling like you're so in your own world, right? And again, this is by design, right? And that's created for elite folks to be kind of like in this artificial space of, oh, nothing can touch me. And then you step out of that into, if you step out, and then you're in, you know, with everybody else. And then you're like anxious and trying to get back in the bubble.
Because you lack the skills. You lack the skills to be able to end information and.
But I don't think it's an ideal state. And I think
no,
today.
it definitely isn't. But people think it is.
And
It's almost like the American dream.
And they
like,
still live it. And I think also, too, when you talk about community colleges, I think still there's a bubble still with a lot of people who think, for example, even if you are of color, there are people who want to live in that white world, right? And I don't know if you're familiar with the word like sellout or the Oreo. So you have people of color who are in a bubble as well and who believe in that dream, and they don't have this inner thought, like, and also learning where they say to me, wait a minute, I'm not going to take this narrative that I'm less than. I'm not going to take this narrative that my history started with slavery. I'm not going to take this narrative that I have to work for you. I can be my own entrepreneur. I'm not going to take it that we can't own our own institutions within our community. So those bubbles exist for us too, I believe.
Yeah, no, but I think you said two things because, you know, I grew up in a white community. I went to several white elite schools that were all meant for that bubble, and the majority of people were existing there and may left there and went into another bubble. So I understand that context, and yes, there is, you know, that majoritarian view tries to convince everyone this is the way and the place where you want to be, right? And it looks attractive from the outside, you know, when they're well resourced, you got all the money,
Right.
you can easily, you know, have the vehicle that you want, you got the big home, the manicured lawn, it all looks terrific. You can go shopping on Newberry Street, Chestnut Hill, wherever it is that you desire to shop, and you can buy everything. And that's what people do. I'm diverging now, but I was just on the vineyard, right? And I'm just like, I watch folks who are, you know, well off or trying to have that appearance, right? Trying to live that dream that you're talking about. And there's this mentality that it's like, how can I buy the world? How can I just gobble up everything? And that is really, to me, a destructive way of looking, like just this need
just
to
not
hoard.
sustainable. It's not sustainable.
And what's
it's
the
not
point?
human.
Yeah.
like-
So anyway.
And I wonder what it does to our children. You know, I
Yeah.
grew up in Wellesley, and you know, I didn't move to Wellesley until high school. I grew up in Marlborough, and then moved to Wellesley, and so it was very much a culture shock for me. My stepmother said that after going to school and coming home, I started to read the dictionary so I would correctly enunciate all of my words because I was being made fun of because of my accent that I had coming from Marlborough. And so I remember meeting all these new kids and obviously in this new school, and what they had and where they would go and how they would go get there. And I remember one of my friends went off to college. We all went off to college, and I remember the first semester we came back, you know, at Christmas break, and she was like, "Wow, I had no idea that everyone didn't have what we had. Like, I went away to college, and wow, do you know people live like differently?" And here she is, 18, almost 19 years old, just understanding that, or even trying to understand that. And so that's what I guess is a little troublesome.
That's what's insidious about racism, right? I mean, just the way we live, and even when someone says to you, why does it always have to be about race, right? And not realizing that we live in a race-based society. And because we live in a race-based society, there are certain systems in place that keeps you away from knowing or getting that information, right? Or it just pushes it away from you. So it's not polite. Don't talk about race. So when you're taught that when you're very little, so then you don't. And then you grow up in a neighborhood where you don't see people, you know, of color.
Well, I think that speaks to America's story of segregation. And we see housing segregation, economic segregation. It's not, you know, and it is based upon race that a lot of that segregation happens, educational segregation. And that's where your view is very limited of people who live differently than you do, have, you know, different economic levels, different cultural backgrounds and things like that. And that kind of isolation is problematic. And I do think that today, because of technology, those artificial walls, or those very real walls, have come down. And that's why we have the guy in Washington trying to build up walls, right? Trying to put physical walls back into place, because technology has actually brought down those walls all around the globe. I was an undergraduate student when the wall between East and West Berlin came down, and that was an extraordinary experience, right? Not just for the German people, but really around the world, that came down, and it was symbolic of a lot of walls that would come down, both physically and you know, just sort of like in the mindset. Because what do you have that follows that is this ability to move around the European continent more freely between states, and then ultimately down the line you get a euro currency, right? There's a lot of internationalism that takes place, and there's now interglobalism, and this like I was talking with my niece when we were on vacation last week, and she's got all this stuff she's doing. She's at Harvard. She just finished her first year, and one is she's building a business, right? Which is really smart. And she's got a team of people who are working with her on this, and they're reaching out to people all over the globe
Right.
for like information, for support, for financing. And you know, she's, I don't know, I think she's 19 or something, right? And she's sharing all this information to me, and I'm like, text that to me. I need to know how I can do this, because I didn't realize just how interconnected we are. And that people respond, right? And so she's making relationships all around the world, and technology allows for this. And they have people on their team who aren't just here in Massachusetts, not just on that Harvard campus. And yet they are making agreements with one another to work together to build something.
So how would you connect that to race, like to race and point, and how that intersects with race, or even racism?
I think that, again, it goes back to this notion of walls, because we have a history of race, right? Racism and separation, segregation along racial and ethnic lines and economic lines, and that these barriers have really come down. And then you have people who are bought into that mindset, that racist, supremacist mindset, and they're saying, how can we reconstruct these walls? And that's what we're seeing now, like on the border.
Is that some of it, or
they,
maybe a majority of it? They're scared that,
scared
you know,
what?
that like Cress Wessling, where she's, I don't know if you're familiar with that professor, she talked about like white race feeling threatened, their phenotype being threatened, that if there's more mixing and so forth, then they would cease to exist. Some of that, you know, the fact that, you know, they're going to be a majority people of color in this country, all of those things. Do you think that that has anything to do with it?
It has some to do with it. I mean, because first of all, let's be clear. There's always been a majority of people of color in the world. Let's just put that out there, okay? That's all. Let's just be clear. This is not new.
If you have a worldview, yes. But in the United States,
I understand, but I'm just wanted to make that clear. The majority of people in the world are people of color.
You are correct.
Okay. So about the fear piece, I think that we see that with these killings, these shootings, these mass murders. All these people who are committing these types of crimes, a lot of their rationale is about, you know, race mixing and maintaining the white race majority. I mean, the guy, Dylan, whatever his last name was, thank you. Not that we really need it, but the fact of the matter is he went into a historic black church in South Carolina. I've been to that church prior to the shooting, as a part of the work that I've done to retrace the African slave trade and also the history of African people in the diaspora coming into the US. And he goes in there and he kills, I don't know the number, 9 people who are in there in a prayer service. There is nothing that is about those individuals that is threatening, that is harmful, that is violent. They are just in there having a spiritual experience, and their thought and their heart is about betterment for all people, right? That's what spirituality is about, okay? And here comes a white man into the church with a loaded automatic weapon, and he goes and he kills as many people as he can, including the pastor, children, grandparents, etc. And what is his rationale? What you're talking about. Oh, I don't want the white race to be eliminated because of some supposed concern that because there are more people of color in the United States, maybe that's going to happen. The same thing, the same rationale down in El Paso, Texas.
Right.
You know, and in all of these shootings.
There was something I saw on Instagram. It had a picture of a white man and there was a caption underneath that said something like to the effect that these people are taking our jobs. And then on the other side had a Muslim Indian man on the side who was a doctor, was a surgeon. And then the bottom of both of those said, how is he taking any job that you would actually have, because you're not a surgeon? And here he is a surgeon, but yet that's some of the excuses as well, right? Because some of those jobs are taken by people who are highly literate, people who have degrees and special kinds of like techniques and skills that they don't possess, right? If they're coming from, and in particular in this scenario, a person who may not even have finished high school or just finished high school.
Well, you know, I just called it up. The U.S. unemployment rate is 3.7%. Everybody's got jobs.
Right.
That 3.7%
So
is
this
all black
narrative
youth.
hysteria.
Only black youth don't have jobs. So no one's job's been taken because everybody's got more than one.
Right.
Most people have more than one job.
And there are so many jobs in this country that are not being filled because we don't have, again, goes back to values in terms of we spend more money on prisons and the military budget than we do our education system. And so, again, all of this is race in point,
Right.
back to race and back to the systems. And I guess, you know, what I worry about is children. I worry about, you know, children not understanding the history of the country, not understanding or having the skill set to be able to be a global citizen. So how do you, you know, raise your child in a community like Wellesley and have obviously an excellent school system, great resources, and then at the end of the day, when they head off to college and decide what they want to do, to be able to have that own comfort with their own human difference, with their own understanding of their own humanity, to be able to connect to someone who is different than they are. When they've had little to no experiences because of segregation, because of what the history of racial segregation in this country by design. And so, you know, we obviously are one of the, you know, 35 towns that is lucky to volunteer to be a METCO community. So we have children of color, black and brown children that are bused into Wellesley, but no one talks about that program. And so children, again, can go through the entire Wellesley public school system from K to 12 and never have a child of color in their class, never have a teacher of color in their class, and then go to college, get their roommate, and all of a sudden they see a name maybe that looks a little bit different, or meet someone, and now the student has a child of color that's now going to room with them. And they're not comfortable with that. And they don't want to live with them. And so now the parents have to make the call. I don't want that roommate. And so what are we doing?
Right. Well, you're doing just that, right? You've set up a whole system from the beginning, like you just showed it. You just stated it, rather.
That's the city's
You know,
nature.
that it's whiteness, 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 staying in this white space, and then you get to a place where, oh, I have someone who's not white is in my environment, or I'm in their environment somewhere, you know, and we
Right.
intersect, and I'm not ready to connect with them. I'm not
Right.
willing to. I'm not willing to because I've never had to. So that is what happens when you don't cultivate diversity in your own lifestyle, right? And those things occur. But you know, I wanted to just say too, just to Lynette's point,
Lavette.
Lavette's point earlier, was I think these are excuses. You know, this notion of fear, it's an excuse. This notion of taking someone's job. I mean, there's more than a plethora of jobs. It's an excuse, right?
But is it conscious or unconscious? So like the implicit bias, like they are not aware that police officer sees a black man put his hand in his pocket, he just automatically sees rational fear that, okay, he must be pulling out a gun and he's gonna hurt me. So I gotta hurt him before he hurts me or subdue him by force. Right? Whereas we've seen examples where there have been white gunmen who have actually killed and they've actually seen them, but they're handling them totally different.
Absolutely. This just happened in El Paso. There was no, they just like went up to him like I'm talking to you and said, okay, let's go.
Well, there you go.
Okay. There was no gunfire. There was no grabbing him or pushing him down.
Or killing him in the process.
Or, you see these young kids of color get thrown to the ground and older people and, they have their faces pushed
and
into the concrete or, like Eric Garner in New York, they're choked to death for having some Lucy's. I mean, these types of activities, this happens all the time for black people, but you can take a mass murderer and you can go up to him and say, oh, put your gun down and come on, let's go. And by the way, with Dylan Roof, we'll stop by Burger King because you look like you're hungry, and pick you up a meal on your way in. So clearly there's a difference, but this is why I say they're excuses, because clearly that's ridiculous. Like, you're so fearful of a young man of color walking in the middle of the street that you have to gun him down and leave him in the middle of the street, right? Or you shoot him 30 times because I think he might have something, though I didn't see anything. And yet you can go before a mass murderer and stand there and not be shaking in your boots, right? It's an excuse and it's not true.
So when
it's mythic.
When you think about an excuse, though, an excuse is more of something that's conscious when it's an excuse, no? Or would you say is unconscious? Because you have to think that a person's, is there, that fear is coming from like history of baggage, right? And what they've experienced in their life and their lack of connection with people of color and what things they've seen on TV and things they've heard relatives say, that all combines into their subconscious where they're saying, oh, I'm fearful. I don't know if they necessarily say that consciously or unconsciously.
Well,
so when you say that excuse
you're
is,
asking that question. My answer is it's conscious. My answer is no, I don't believe in all this implicit bias. Okay, I mean, I think implicit bias is used as an excuse. I mean, it's one of those things where we're constantly trying to either excuse racism or ignore racism, right? Or pretend like it doesn't exist or it doesn't matter. Right?
It's a myth, it's a hoax.
It's not important. What you had talked about earlier about, why does it always have to be about race? Any kind of way we can avoid the discussion, yet we can act racist, right? So that we can keep that going. I have an issue with the leaning on this notion of implicit bias. I don't believe so. Now, yes, I do believe that racist mental models are taught in our schools and taught in our societies and taught in our communities. And so what we have is a culture full of racists. And people act on that, whether it's, me and my family barbecuing in the park in Oakland and a woman coming by, white woman, and saying, oh, you can't barbecue there, that's not allowed, and gets on the phone and starts calling the police and standing surveillance over me. Well, you know what? You could say, well, that was just that situation, but I'm a black woman. I've had people survey me all the time, white people. No matter where I'm going, whether I'm going into Macy's or going into 7-Eleven or, or standing on a street corner, these situations occur, or walking on your college campus where you work. And we have more and more stories like this. So no, it's not unconscious bias. It's actually very conscious racist activity, racist thinking that has been deliberately developed within the mindset of American people to serve a purpose of having a certain group have a sense of superiority and to oppress others. And people have bought into this notion of oppression. This is why, again, activity like what is taking place on the border can happen. Oh, we can oppress brown people. They can be mistreated like that. Now, what if you treated a person from Wellesley like that? Said, we're going to lock you up in a room. We're not even going to give you a mat, and showers of food for you. They would be horrified, right? And when sometimes these types of treatments happen to the people who sit by benignly and allow for it to happen and say, oh, implicitly, I don't know what's going on.
I think that would be a little different.
Amnesiac.
Yeah, I think that would be a little different.
Then there's a problem. There's a problem.
We're talking about things that happen like right on the spur of the moment, like with the police interacting with somebody and has to like. And
it just doesn't play out.
No,
I think
because
I really have to agree with Sol that, again, if it consistently happened with every situation, regardless of the person's race, that when they had a hairbrush or a gun or not a gun or loose cigarette, if everyone was treated this way, then I would say that maybe there's something about this fear and that your fear of a criminal.
Why are we hiring all these cowards for police officers?
Right, if you're that
fearful, why is this your position?
Exactly.
You should go and be like, I don't know what you should do.
And obviously not all police officers certainly.
But this is how the discourse comes across. This is like, why we got all these fearful police?
Right.
Why are you in that business?
Right.
Okay, if you're going to be in a police officer or a military person or someone who jumps out of a plane,
you are taking that risk. That's why you're paid.
And you
very
need to have that kind of mindset, right? That you're more likely to be in a risky situation and have the mentality and even the desire to be in that kind of situation and deal with it in a organized fashion. So I'm concerned about who are we hiring, but I'll tell you who we're hiring. We're hiring a lot of racist people to be police officers, to hold this situation in place. Because why would you hire progressive or inclusive people in those roles? Because if you did, they would treat people more fairly when there are circumstances that take place, and we'd have less of these shootings of innocent, unarmed folks. Yeah. They are particularly looking for racist people to sit in the position as police and then to uphold, again, this racist society.
This system.
Yeah, exactly. And
that's going to be very difficult, I think, for people to hear. And people want to, well, my uncle's a police officer, he's not like that. Mm-hmm. And my brother's a police officer, he's not like that.
But they need to look at it in the system. They shouldn't just look at that one individual. We're talking about a system. And we're talking about an institution of legal, in legal enforcement, right? And those individuals make up that system and institution, right? And if a majority of them think a certain way, then what do they expect, right? So
it's a culture,
right? And thinking about individuals who might say it came up a couple of times when a person says, well, why does everything have to be about race? So with Race in Point, we want to make those connections and help people to understand why it is about race. Mm-hmm. So if a person were to say that to you, how would you respond if a person said to you, oh, come on, Sol, everything's not about race? Okay. Why are you saying that? Why everything's always about race with you? Well, how would you respond to them?
I don't, it would be a day-to-day situation. I don't even know how I would fully respond to that. But I think that in this conversation that we had, we talked about the fact that it is always about race, isn't it? Or mostly about race.
It is.
And we do live in a society that has been constructed by race. Let's be clear. This country was built by African slaves. A lot of the infrastructure was laid down by African slaves, that is enslaved black people, working free labor to build up a nation, to lay down roads and raise up buildings and do the agricultural cultivation, etc.
For 260 years, and then you had convict leasing for another.
And sharecropping, which was a ripoff.
Right.
Okay.
And now we have convict leasing again.
Yeah.
So now what is happening is when this administration is not allowing immigrants into the country from the southern border, or doing raids of 650 people from the chicken plant, now what these corporations are now doing are now taking inmates out of the jails, because in the 13th Amendment it says slavery is abolished unless you are in jail.
Right.
And that's not new. I mean,
No,
yes,
but
like
it's
they
new.
privatized prisons and they increased the incarceration rate so that you have more imprisoned people,
Makes sense.
mostly black and brown,
Right.
who can then be used as free labor. And and that's like, they have gene companies. A lot of the products that we purchase that are made in America are made by American prisoners.
Right.
Okay.
And the fires that were put out in California.
And there you have it. And the roads that are maintained in the South, you see these chain gangs
Yes.
still existing. Rachel Rawlins, who is someone you might want to have on your show, because
Absolutely.
she is the Suffolk DA who's causing all sorts of grief for like people who really don't want justice.
People
right?
who want to maintain the system.
Who want to maintain the system. And this goes to our point. She's quoted today in the press of saying, she was criticized as being, a social justice prosecutor. And that
what's wrong
is,
with that?
well, that's her point. That's what she responds, right? And this was, she was hitting back against U.S. Attorney General William Barr, who recently criticized progressive social justice prosecutors. And a reporter for the Boston Herald was writing about that, and Rawlins responds, "Better to be a social justice prosecutor than a social injustice one." Better to be a social justice prosecutor than a social injustice one. And this is what we're talking about.
Then what she has to deal with, no?
Better to be a social justice person than a social injustice one. But that is what people have been unfortunately embracing by embracing racist systems, is acting from a position of social injustice. And that's a position that I can never stand on. And it's not just for me about black people or brown people, but it's about oppressed people, it's about marginalized people, and it's about justice and injustice. And anytime there is injustice that is taking place in this community, in the organization I work in society at large, in the world, I cannot embrace injustice. That's me personally. And it would be wonderful if more people would stand up for justice for everyone, instead of saying, well, you know what, I'm getting fair treatment, or I like how I'm being treated, and I can ignore the fact that someone else is being mistreated.
And somehow believing that we're not connected, that individual mentality, when we are all connected. What happens to you happens to me. And so understanding that collectively we can liberate each other with that understanding. And it goes back to what do you value? What are your values? And how do those play out in reality?
How do you live those values?
Yes.
And that has
do
to
you
start,
live your values?
That's right.
it has to start young.
It
Okay,
really
it has to,
does.
and it has to be something that's repetitive and something that's always in the culture that tells them to do that, because it's not going to happen later on.
No, it isn't.
And I do want to go back to a point you made, Michelle, about officers in one's family who are people who you know and love, and who
You have officers in your family.
I have a lot of, I have patriots in my family, and Tuskegee Airmen in my family. I have a lot of people who've been in the military, you know, so it's, you know, again, here we have mythic language. You know, it's put out in the prevailing view is that, like, black people are unpatriotic and they, you know, aren't, you know, behind the country. Whereas I have so many people. Yeah, exactly. Meanwhile, we've been actually in war. We've been on the front lines. We've actually enlisted in these wars, not been conscripted, but enlisted to fight for this country. I grew up in a family full of patriots, you know, where we had to go out on Veterans Day and hand out poppies, and my family started Veterans Post, you know, and this was really a part of the culture. You know, everybody was in a service area, whether it was the Army, my dad in the Navy, the Air Force, et cetera, over generations. So that's very mythic and really passionate, and it wasn't just about the war or wars or the time in which they were in the military, but it was about the men in service and the women in service, and I should say women as well, who were committed, their experience both in the service and after the service, and they were always involved throughout their lives. So we need to, you know, really push back again on a wrong and false narrative and around people of color. So this is, and that it's only meant to deny our participation and our, you know, involvement in this country. Crispus Attucks.
Right.
The 54th Regiment.
Right in Boston.
My uncle was in the Tuskegee Airmen. Let me tell you something, we wouldn't have had the success in World War II and maybe the victory without them.
Right.
Okay, so there's so much that we have invested in this country to uphold this country to this very moment that I'm talking about, that I have current family members who are, let me tell you, waving flags, but not hostilely. Right. Not like the folks who wave flags and behind that they're threatening black people and wanting to do another lynching, you know, this lynch kind of mentality that exists to this very day, right? And whether, you know, they've brought down some of these Confederate flags and some of these Confederate statues, but people uphold the U.S. flag like it's a Confederate flag. And they threaten people in black communities and brown communities with it. And again, this is what we're seeing on the border. And these folks are coming here to work. They're coming here to participate. They're coming here to raise families. They're coming here to be a part. And that has been the American story since America began. Whether they were pulling slaves against their will, or it was people who were trying to escape something else or get here, by boats of all backgrounds, Americans consist of a peoples who have come to this land to build their lives and to uphold, for the most part, a community of many. And yet here we are trying to deny people this very American experience and determine who can have it, who can embody it, who can claim it based upon the color of their skin. And the color of their skin means nothing, because the color of my skin does not tell you anything about my history and my heritages. And we need to stop talking about just black and white and brown and red and yellow, because those are Crayola colors. Right. You need to understand who we are as people. Okay. We are multi-dimensional, multi-international people. You know, when they challenged Kamala Harris about being a Jamaican American, not an African American, who are white people to say who black people are? None of us are just African Americans. Many of us are Jamaican, and I'm Bayesian. Yeah, I got Bayesian in me. I got other things. Like I said, you don't know me from this color. Right. Okay? I got Arawak too. Okay? So these are the things that, and it's not about color, because the reality is, it's that many of us have many backgrounds, many that are unknown, and that again comes out of the conscription, but many of them are known and they're not acknowledged. Right. You know, they're not acknowledged because we're not acknowledged because of racism. And so our story is not talked about. It's not brought into the classroom. It's not brought into the studio. It's not on television. And we get a very narrow viewpoint of what a black person is supposedly. And it has nothing to do with who black people are.
That's right. And I think that we all lose in that situation. We really do. With the richness of your story, to not be understood and not to be heard, we really lose. And I feel like my life is so much richer with understanding the history and understanding the truth. It is hard. It is hard to face. It is hard to understand that my ancestors came here at the beginning of the 20th century, stepping over black and brown people to become white, giving up their language, giving up their culture, giving up anything they could to bypass, to become white and have access and opportunity on the backs of black and brown people and indigenous people. And that is, that's a difficult history, but I can only be a better person by accepting that and understanding that. And then how am I going to live my values differently knowing that? Right. And where am I, who am I going to engage with, and what am I going to make sure that my children understand so they have a better understanding of the world to change things? Because this system is not working. It really isn't. It isn't even working for the people who think it's working. It really isn't. And so I'm really thankful that you came here today to speak with us on Race and Point. Definitely. I think these are the conversations that we need to be having. And for people to be listening, I hope that people are still listening and engaging. And what's wonderful is it can go on the internet and people can revisit it. If there's something that we said or that needs to be heard, sometimes you need to listen a couple of times to really process and understand. And that's okay. Because again, by design, we were not taught these things. Speaking as a white person growing up in Wellesley, I did not have this understanding, did not have this knowledge by design. And I think a lot of my teachers did not even have this understanding or have this knowledge.
I just want to, I know you're coming to a close, but I want to interject because it does go back to education. And I was just thinking as you were talking, like what's going on with the schools here in Wellesley, whether or not they're getting a diversity officer on the high school, what is the status of that? You probably don't have time to address that. But 85% of the teaching corps in the United States is white.
White women.
Okay, so there you have a problem because what is being taught, right? So you're just saying
and
like
what isn't being taught.
And what isn't being taught and what is being taught. So it does, again, touch very deeply in terms of education because education begins, early childhood education, right?
Yeah.
And it just continues. And this is what people hold as sort of like the foundation of their knowledge and their understanding.
Absolutely.
And whether, again, systematically, we have 85% white women teaching the script, right? And that is where these racist viewpoints get embedded in people's understanding, the myth making, and all of this. And that needs to be looked at and it needs to be changed.
There's a book on why I think it's a history book of what my teacher, lies teacher.
The lies my teacher told me. Yeah. By Richard Lowen. Yeah.
Yeah. She told you a whole lot. It was like that could have been an encyclopedia set.
It's this big. It's really this big, and it's like 20th edition.
There it is.
Yes, Richard Lowen, James Lowen. I apologize, Professor James Lowen. Just amazing man. Follow him on Twitter. He's amazing. So we are very, very thankful to Laura Soul Brown for being with us today.
Thank you.
We could have kept talking. We had so much more that we wanted to talk about, right?
And we'll also leave some information because we talked about some things, and we'll leave some information about some citations and some books and also some documentaries for you to watch.
That should be
That are
on
related
your,
to what we talked about.
Yeah, absolutely. That will also post on our website for you. And please reach out to us at raceinpoint@gmail.com if you have any comments, any suggestions, anyone in town that is interested to come and have a conversation with us. We would love to have you. And so please reach out to us. And thank you again to Sol for coming. And we'd love to have you back, actually, to talk more about MassBay and what's happening there with students in the community. And thank you so much for having us.
Well, thank you for having me, and
Yes.
yeah, invite me back anytime. You can see I get into this.
As we all should.
That's
Thank
right.
you.
Thank you for
See you
joining
next time.